Right now, there is a lot of buzz surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles, and it all centers around one name that has suddenly become the focus of conversations across the league: Jaylen Carter. Multiple teams around the NFL have reportedly reached out to Philadelphia to ask about the young defensive tackle, and that alone has sparked a huge debate about what the organization might be thinking behind the scenes. The big question everyone is asking is simple but shocking at the same time. Could the Eagles actually consider moving one of the most talented young defenders in football? According to reports from Jeremy Fowler, several teams have contacted the Eagles about the possibility of trading for Carter as the league approaches the start of free agency. Now it's important to understand the difference between teams calling about a player and a team actively shopping that player. When a young star like Carter becomes even remotely available, front offices around the NFL will immediately pick up the phone. That's just how the business works. But the timing of these calls is what has really sparked the speculation. The conversation really began to heat up after the Eagles made a major financial commitment to another defensive tackle, Jordan Davis. Philadelphia recently signed Davis to a massive contract extension that averages about $26 million per year, with more than $60 million guaranteed. That number surprised a lot of people around the league. Many expected Davis to land somewhere between $15 and $20 million annually, but the Eagles went much higher than that. Naturally, when a team pays one defensive tackle that kind of money, people start wondering what it means for the other star at the same position. And that brings us back to Carter. If the young defensive tackle continues to perform at the level many believe he can, his next contract could easily surpass $30 million per season. In fact, there is a real possibility that he could become the highest paid defensive tackle in NFL history if he returns to elite form. When you start stacking those kinds of contracts together on one defensive line, it creates a very real financial challenge for the front office led by Howie Roseman. Roseman also has to think about the future of several other young defensive stars on the roster. Cornerback Quinyon Mitchell is expected to command a massive extension down the road, potentially over $30 million per season, and defensive back Cooper DeJean could also be in line for a contract worth more than $25 million annually if his development continues. When you add all of that together, the Eagles simply cannot pay everyone. But there is another important layer to this story that fans should understand. Even though the rumors are swirling, the Eagles are not under immediate pressure to make a decision about Carter. The team still has control of his contract situation for the next 2 seasons if they exercise his 5th-year option. That means Philadelphia technically has time to evaluate how things develop before committing to a massive extension. From Carter's perspective, the strategy might also be to wait. He is represented by super agent Drew Rosenhaus, one of the most influential agents in professional sports. If Carter rebounds from the injury issues that affected him in 2025 and delivers another dominant season like he did earlier in his career, his market value could skyrocket. At that point, he wouldn't just be negotiating for a big contract, he could be negotiating for a record-breaking one. Still, some analysts believe there could be other factors making the Eagles cautious. There have been occasional questions about Carter's maturity and concerns about long-term shoulder issues. Whether those concerns are significant enough to influence the team's future plans is something only the organization truly knows, but they are part of the discussion happening around the league. Despite all the speculation, many observers still believe trading Carter would be an extremely risky move. He is widely considered one of the most disruptive interior defenders in the entire NFL. Players who can dominate from the defensive tackle position are incredibly rare, especially those who can consistently impact both the run game and the passing game. In many ways, elite interior pass rushers are harder to find than edge rushers. Because of that, if the Eagles were ever to seriously consider a trade, the asking price would have to be enormous. Some analysts believe the starting point would be at least 2 first-round picks. Carter is still only in his mid-20s and already established himself as one of the most dangerous defensive forces in football. That type of talent doesn't get moved unless the return is massive. And interestingly enough, there are already whispers about which teams could be interested. Several franchises are reportedly monitoring the situation closely and trying to gauge whether the Eagles would actually entertain offers for Carter if the right deal came along. But here's where the story becomes even more intriguing for Eagles fans, because while teams are calling about Carter, there are also reports that Philadelphia's front office has made it a priority this offseason to keep its defensive front intact. That includes working on extensions for players like Carter himself and pass rusher Jalen Phillips, who the team reportedly wants to retain at more than $20 million per year after his strong production in Philadelphia. So on one hand, teams are calling about Carter. On the other hand, the Eagles appear to be trying to keep their defensive core together. Those two realities create a fascinating situation as free agency approaches and decisions start to loom for the organization. And that leads to the biggest question surrounding this entire situation right now. If a team really did offer a package like 2 first-round picks for Jaylen Carter, would the Eagles actually consider pulling the trigger? Or is Carter simply too valuable to ever let go? What do you think the team should do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Another major element in all of this revolves around how the Philadelphia Eagles are trying to build their defense moving forward. And one name that continues to come up in these internal discussions is Jalen Phillips. Reports indicate that Philadelphia is working aggressively to bring Phillips back on a long-term deal that could exceed $20 million per year. That tells you a lot about how highly the organization values what he brought to the defense. When Phillips arrived in Philadelphia, the impact was immediate. His presence helped elevate the defensive front from being very good to legitimately dominant over the second half of the season. In just 8 games with the Eagles, Phillips generated 41 pressures on opposing quarterbacks. That number alone shows how disruptive he was every single week. But it wasn't just about raw pressure numbers. He also produced 32 quarterback hurries, 2 sacks, and 7 quarterback hits in that short span. Those are the types of numbers that change games, especially in critical moments when the defense needs a stop. And that's exactly why the Eagles coaching staff and front office want him back. The system implemented by defensive coordinator Vic Fangio relies heavily on players who can consistently pressure the quarterback without needing constant blitzes. Phillips proved he can do that while also holding his own against the run, which is extremely valuable in Fangio's scheme. When a defender can affect both phases of the game like that, his value skyrockets. Now think about the bigger picture here. If the Eagles are working hard to extend Phillips, while also already committing massive money to Jordan Davis, and eventually needing to make a decision on Jaylen Carter, the financial puzzle becomes even more complicated. Building an elite defensive line is something the Eagles have prioritized for years, but at some point the salary cap forces difficult choices, and that brings us to another storyline that continues to quietly hover over this offseason, the future of A.J. Brown. There has been ongoing speculation about a potential trade involving Brown, and while nothing has happened yet, many around the league believe that if a move were to happen, it would likely happen soon. The reason is simple. The closer the Eagles get to free agency and the NFL draft, the more clarity they need about their roster. If Brown remains on the team, the wide receiver position is not a major concern heading into the offseason. But if he were traded, that would instantly become one of the biggest needs on the entire roster. The Eagles would then have to find another playmaker, either through free agency, the draft, or potentially another trade. That type of shift would completely alter the team's offseason strategy, and that's why the next stretch of time is so critical for the Eagles front office led by Howie Roseman. Roseman has built a reputation as one of the most aggressive and creative executives in the NFL. He is always exploring opportunities to improve the roster, whether that means extending key players, making blockbuster trades, or finding value signings in free agency. But at the same time, every move has ripple effects across the roster. Extending one player can affect the future of another. Trading a star might create cap space, but also open a hole somewhere else. And right now, the Eagles appear to be balancing multiple high-stakes decisions all at once. For fans watching all of this unfold, it can feel like a whirlwind of rumors, reports, and speculation. One day the focus is on Carter, the next day it's about Phillips. Then suddenly conversations shift to A.J. Brown. That's the reality of the NFL offseason, especially when you're a contender with a roster full of young stars who are approaching major contracts. What seems clear though is that the Eagles want to keep their defensive front as strong as possible. Players like Carter, Davis, and Phillips represent the physical identity of the defense. They are the type of players who can take over games at the line of scrimmage and make life miserable for opposing offenses. Losing one of them would be a major decision that could shape the direction of the team for years. At the same time, the Eagles know they cannot simply ignore the financial realities of the league. Contracts continue to grow, and every dollar spent on one star limits what can be spent elsewhere. That's why the front office must carefully evaluate which players are true long-term building blocks and which situations might eventually lead to tough decisions. Over the next several days, as free agency officially begins and teams across the league start making moves, the situation around the Eagles could become much clearer. Trades could happen, extensions could be finalized, Or the team could decide to stay patient and keep the core of this roster together for another run. One thing is certain though, the decisions being made right now inside the Eagles organization will have a massive impact on the future of the team. Another layer that makes this entire situation even more fascinating is the growing interest from teams around the league. According to the reports circulating as the offseason approaches, several franchises have already started exploring what it might take to acquire Jaylen Carter if the Philadelphia Eagles were ever willing to listen to offers. And the list of potential suitors is not made up of random teams either. These are organizations that are either contenders or franchises trying to make a massive defensive upgrade. Among the teams that have reportedly checked in are the Green Bay Packers, the Chicago Bears, the San Francisco 49ers, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Las Vegas Raiders. When you see that many teams from different parts of the league showing interest in the same player, it reinforces just how valuable Carter is viewed across the NFL. This is not just a good defensive tackle. This is a player many believe can dominate games from the interior of the defensive line. That's why the conversation about a potential trade quickly shifts to the return package. If a player of Carter's caliber were to be moved, the compensation would have to reflect that elite value. Many analysts believe the absolute starting point would be 2 first-round draft picks. That might sound like a huge price, but when you look at recent blockbuster trades involving star defensive players, the market has already been set. For example, a deal involving Micah Parsons reportedly brought back 2 first-round selections in a recent blockbuster trade scenario discussed around the league. In another major move, star pass rusher Max Crosby also commanded 2 first-round picks when he was traded. Those examples help explain why the asking price for Carter would likely be extremely high. And remember, Carter is still very young. He is only in his mid-20s and already widely considered one of the most disruptive defensive linemen in football. That combination of youth, production, and upside is exactly what teams dream about building around. When a player like that even appears remotely available, front offices start making calls immediately. But here is where things become a bit more complicated. Even though teams are calling about Carter, there are also reports suggesting the Eagles have made it a priority this offseason to keep their defensive front together. That includes the big extension already given to Jordan Davis and ongoing efforts to retain Jalen Phillips on a long-term deal. Those moves point toward a strategy of maintaining one of the most dominant defensive fronts in the league rather than breaking it apart. From the perspective of general manager Howie Roseman, the logic is easy to understand. The Eagles have built their identity around controlling the line of scrimmage. When your defensive line can pressure quarterbacks, stop the run, and collapse the pocket without needing constant blitzing, it makes the entire defense more effective. That philosophy has been a major reason why Philadelphia has remained competitive year after year. The defensive line sets the tone, allowing the rest of the defense to play faster and more aggressively. Losing a player like Carter would unquestionably change that dynamic. At the same time, Roseman is known for always listening to offers. Around the NFL, executives rarely say a player is completely untouchable. Instead, they simply set a price that reflects how valuable the player truly is. In Carter's case, that price might be so high that no team is willing to meet it. There is also the possibility that some of the noise surrounding Carter is simply part of the typical offseason